Howdy, folks. Today, I wanted to take a stab at maybe trying to understand what was going on with the tech industry right now and why it's so hard for people to find jobs. Let's get into it. So, as some of you may not know, I am currently a senior software engineer. I have worked in tech for about 18 years. And since about 2017, midway through 2017, I started keeping track of what recruiters were reaching out to me. And this was initially because I was looking for another job and I need to keep track of the recruiters I'd actually talked to because there were quite a few. But eventually it just became kind of a thing. So every time a recruiter sends me an email, I note it down in the spreadsheet. I note a bunch of information about the job, the recruiter, that sort of thing. It's useful data for me. But the interesting part about it is the date. So what that means is I actually have information for the last 8 years of how many recruiters have contacted me on a day-to-day basis. And I want to go over that today and share that with you and share some of the aggregates because I think it'll be really interesting to kind of see what has happened. So this right here is a breakdown, an aggregate of how many recruiters reached out to me every single month. From starting in 2017 in July, all the way to this month, which isn't quite over. And it's kind of spiky. Like, I don't know what happened here. Or here. These were interesting months. But you can kind of see general pattern. But then right here, this is about towards the end of 2022, it just plummets. And it kind of smooths out. Like we're seeing a different pattern here. And this, I think, is what a lot of people are running into. Now, I am someone who, and I say this with no trace of modesty at all, companies want to hire. I have a lot of experience with a lot of technologies, and so they want to hire me, which means that if there are positions open, people will probably be emailing me about them, which means that the fact that this has dropped off, I think, completely unmathematically or statistically, does kind of indicate a change in the industry as a whole. So I went ahead and I did a polynomial interpolation over that. Don't ask me how the math for this works. I have no idea. I basically just told Google Sheets to do it. And you can see a pattern here. There's some hills and there's dips, right? The industry goes through cycles, dips and a dip. But after that last dip, it doesn't seem like we're bouncing back that quickly. And I think this is kind of the problem. Here, probably a really good time to be in the market as a software engineer. A lot of people want to hire you. Maybe not so much here. A little harder to get a job. In fact, 2020, I think I was at Zoom Pizza for that. This is like pandemic, around the pandemic time. Pop back up, a little bit lower of a hill, but still there. And then when it dropped, you'd expect it to if it'd come back up at the same rate, we'd be about here now. And there'd be a lot of, and we did see a little hump there, but not what we've been seeing before, not those giant spikes. And so that kind of made me curious, like what happened? What exactly happened? There's theories all over. So here, this is kind of a snapshot of that little area bi-weekly. So this is how many have done it a week, and I've labeled a couple points here. So on July 12th, 2022, Microsoft announced layoffs. On the 20th, Google froze hiring. Amazon froze some hiring on the 1st and then froze more on the 4th of November. Or not November, what is this? That would be August. Apple also froze hiring. Then down here was the Twitter bloodbath, where Twitter laid off 90% of its employees, and after that, a bunch of other companies continued firing. This is normal, right? This actually happens on a cyclical basis. And what had happened here is that during the pandemic, a lot of companies hired. And as we got at Salesforce, they described it as macroeconomic headwinds. When that happened, they decided, okay, let's cut the dead weight. We hired too many people. Let's cut like the bottom 10, 15%. Perfectly normal. Twitter was not normal. Twitter, 90% of their devs, that was not at all normal. I put in ChatGPT 4 here because I thought initially that maybe this this downturn was because of AI. But like, I don't have it on here. ChatGPT 3 and 2 were like right here. So the downturn had already happened by that point. They didn't help. And if I go down a little bit further, this is a little zoomed out. And this is kind of an interesting picture because this red line here is the federal interest rate. Interesting correlation there, isn't there? So basically what has happened, and this is my theory, okay? I don't have a lot of evidence for this at all. Or at least I haven't bothered to look up any evidence because I'm a developer. Why would I do that? Is that as the interest rates goes up, and again, also not an economist, as the interest rate goes up, it becomes more expensive to borrow money. But basically, the more this goes up, the higher interest rates on loans go up. And that means that loans, especially like big loans to businesses, bonds, things like that, the bond rate has to go up too, because if the US government wants a loan, they have to compete with private people who also want a loan. So if I've got cash to give, the US government's offering me 3% and someone else is offering me 7%, well, I'm going to go with the 7%, even though they're more risky, you see. But basically, VCs is why this is important. VCs, venture capitalists, they flood the markets with money normally. And around this time, around here, well, actually, let's go back here. Around this time, you could see these spikes. The VCs were just flooding the market with money. They had so much money because the stock market was doing great and they didn't know what to do with it. So they were basically giving any startup that had any decent pitch deck as much money as they could stomach. Then the interest rates went up. And now a lot of those VCs, the VCs themselves probably didn't pull out too much, but a lot of their investors started saying, well, might be better to put my money into loans because startups are very risky. The rate of return, I don't know what the rate of return is, but I would guess, hazard a guess, it's probably somewhere around here, maybe. Because as soon as that started getting higher, we started seeing all the VCs start to pull their money, or the money started drying up because all the investors were starting to put their money in other places. What that meant is all these companies, because these companies themselves are not VC funded. The thing is, who buys a lot of Google Workspaces? Who buys a lot of AWS stuff? How many companies right now are getting $10 million in VC funding and throwing $5 million of that right into AWS just to do AI stuff, right? Or throwing into OpenAI, which is basically kind of the same thing because they pay all the data centers. So these companies actually do a lot, and Apple too. Like every person that joins a tech startup gets a $3,000 MacBook. You know, a lot of that is Apple revenue. So these guys they're like, okay, we're going to be okay. I mean, Apple's like worth, what, $1 trillion? They're going to be fine. But they said, okay, we're seeing that there's probably going to be some loss in our revenue. Okay? So our shareholders aren't going to be happy with that. And when the shareholders are unhappy, all hell breaks loose. We need to keep their only goal is keeping the shareholders happy. So we're going to fire some people because when they fire people, that drop in expense offsets the drop in income, and then they can go to their shareholders and they say, yes, our growth was not as great as we wanted, but we still had some growth. And shareholders they're like, yeah, okay, that the market sucks, so you had some growth, that's good. That's what happened. Part of the cycle, right? Problem is, we're not coming back. Not yet. And that's because the interest rates are still quite high, which means that there's still not a ton of VC funding. There is VC funding. Like, to be clear, if you're like, yeah, but all my friends work at startups. Yeah, sure. There's still startups, but there's not startups to the same volume that there were. And there's also a lot of startups because the AI craze is going on. Also, AI. So what happened is a lot of these companies laid off a bunch of engineers, Twitter especially. During this period here, all those engineers were struggling to find jobs because we're in a downturn. By about this point, most of them have either found jobs or they've given up and become farmers. And at that point, we expect it to start turning up again because the VCs are coming back online and saying, oh, there's money. Let's throw money into it. People are coming up with new ideas. that's when a lot of junior engineers, a lot of new grads are starting to get jobs because a startup comes on board. There's not a lot of senior tech, or they don't have a lot of money to spend on senior tech, so they hire 5 or 6 bootcamp grads. That didn't happen. That didn't happen because not only was the money not quite there as much, but also now we had ChatGPT. And now people are saying, well, why would I want to hire a boot camp grad? I can just hire a senior and give them ChatGPT, and they're as good as 6 boot camp grads, which may or may not be true. But that's why we're seeing this go very slowly. And so what I think, this is just a prediction. I actually, this is just, I'm not an expert in any of these things. I think it's going to come back because what we're seeing, AI is not as good as people thought it was. And it's not growing super fast either. And so I really think that if we look another 2 years down the line, I think we'll have come back to this point. And I think like at this point, this point back here, you could still get a job as a bootcamp grad. Here, maybe not so much. Like the market was kind of rough around these parts. It was getting rough around here. But there were still positions. Now there's not even positions. But I think we're going to get back to the point where there are positions. I think it's just taking longer than expected, which, was not what I anticipated when I looked at this. I was kind of like, oh, we're all screwed forever. But I really think that we're going to recover. I think it's just going to take longer than people were hoping. So here's hoping. Good luck, folks. Have a good one. I'll see y'all next time.